Greetings, hello, thank you for tuning in and keeping up with what we're doing. I'm Solomon Wangwe, if you don't know who I am. And today I'm so excited because I have two very special people in our offices to have a conversation about a video I'm sure many of you have seen where we handed over title deeds to Caroline Mutoko's people,
Yes.
Mutoko and Kimeu.
My broke people.
Well,
They are.
yes, in theory. And a lot of you sent a ton of questions about how you can also do the same for your kids.
True.
How do I register a title in my kids' names? I didn't even know that was possible, blah, blah, blah. And so we thought it was going to be a good idea to have this conversation
Yes.
with Caroline. And we have Mr. Adnan Khan, who is a partner at Anjarwalla Khanna, in charge of real estate. I believe I have all your credentials, right?
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So disclaimer, because I know many of you are asking what happened to Andrew and who is Anjarwalla Khanna. The reason we reached out to Adnan is because, as I've mentioned, he runs the real estate department for Anjarwalla Khanna, best law firm, not just in Kenya, but in Africa, several times voted.
You're an award-winning law firm?
Yes, a serious one. And for that reason, I only save them for my really expensive transactions. Because they don't come cheap. And so, for that reason, I'm super excited because he knows his stuff.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we're about to find out.
Yeah.
So a couple of weeks ago, I was in this very room with my children and my mother, and I was here because I wanted to start something new. And that was not wait until, a time when they don't get it, don't understand it, it's too much, to say, oh, by the way, I bought you land. And a lot of you were like, wait, is that possible? So what I'm going to do with Adnan is literally go through the comments and questions. So the first one was, can you buy land for minors? The answer is no, but.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, according to the law, minors are not able to enter into contracts. So unfortunately, they can't enter into an agreement for sale or a transfer. So what typically...
And they can't afford the stamp duty either.
Yeah.
Theory has it.
Yeah, in theory, yes.
But minors can't afford the purchase price, forget the stamp duty, which is going to be anywhere between 2 and 4%. So obviously it's 2% on agricultural land and 4% anything outside. So long short of it is minors can't own land in their own capacity. So what would ordinarily tend to happen is they would either acquire it through a guardian or through a trustee. Guardian would be any parent or a relative.
Which is what we did in Caroline's case.
In my case.
Yeah.
And of course, when I was asked, I said, no, it's held in trust until they're 18. So the next question is, what is a trust?
Great question. Because what tends to happen is parents purchase the property or whatever it is for their children, but what they forget to do is to kind of create the trust. And it's important to figure that out upfront for a number of reasons. One is, God forbid, in the event of passing away of the guardian or the trustee, you don't want that property forming part of the estate of the person who's holding the property.
In trust, yes.
Because what that happens is if it's not properly documented and falls as part of the estate of the individual holding it, it straight away defeats the purpose of why the property was acquired in the first place.
Because the minor can't access it.
Minor can't access it, and God forbid if that's not a son or a daughter of the person who's passed away, where you automatically tend to have some legal rights to the estate of the deceased. So let's say, for instance, it's me holding it for Solomon's children.
Yes.
And if that's not properly documented and Solomon's relatives and children are not aware of it, straight away becomes my estate, my children get access to it. So it's important to figure out how that's done.
Yes.
And
you need a lawyer.
You do need a lawyer.
You need a lawyer.
Yes, sadly, while you try to avoid doctors and lawyers, this is one of the instances where...
Yeah, you can't wing it.
People try to avoid doctors and lawyers?
Oh yeah, because it's painful and expensive.
And it is painful and expensive, but in the long run,
yeah, cheap is more expensive.
And then the other reason why it's important to do it is for tax reasons. So I don't know whether you've done any declarations of trust or registered the property in trust, but when the eventual time comes to transfer the property from the trustee to the individual, you have potential capital gains tax and stamp duty.
which is not 15%.
As if it was a sale.
Yes.
Okay.
So if it's not properly documented at the relevant point in time when you're going to apply for the transfer, you're going to be caught out with a lot of surprises. So capital gains tax went up from 5% and it's going to go up to 15 come 1st January. God forbid, we don't know when you're going to transfer it to
I know, you don't know what it will be
what
then.
it will be then.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just important to kind of plan those things up front.
Okay.
Are you listening? Are you listening?
It's a good point to make. So just to clarify, if we're creating a trust and you're the trustee, is that an entity that you're creating, or is it just a legal agreement?
Is it a vehicle?
Right, like an LLP or
an LLC?
So there's various ways at looking at it. One of the simplest ways is where an individual can just own it. Okay, so like Caroline owns it in trust for her son.
Yes.
And we prepare the necessary documentation and have it registered on the title saying Caroline holding it in trust for a minor, and those documents are then submitted at the registry. Now, previously, before the land laws were amended in 2012, there was no requirement to have that registered on the title.
Yeah.
There was also no requirement to submit those documents. But as a matter of good practice, just so that you want to try and manage the taxman at the end, some people would, out of abundance of caution, just try and push the registrar to put a note on the title saying, as trustee.
As trustee,
but not necessarily as trustee for who. Now, the land laws in 2012 were amended. They've kind of borrowed a similar structure, but then subsequently in 2018, regulations were passed and forms were published. And there are forms that actually allow you to get that registration as trustee. There are documents that actually say that ABC holding it in trust for DEF.
Yes, exactly.
And those documents are held at the registry. And then at the relevant point in time, all these documents kind of help you in terms of the eventual transfer. They also try and help avoid cases of fraud where someone says, hang on, I don't have anything. But you've got some documents that kind of help you at the registry and also as you keep them that cover your backside. So that could be done even whether you hold it as an individual. The other way you could do it is acquire it through a company, but then either way you're holding the shares in the company in trust for the individual. So you've got to kind of do that. So it depends on how complicated you want to make it. Like I said, the issue with holding it as an individual, unfortunately, is the trust arrangement only leaves for as long as
you live.
As the trustee leaves, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to think how long you want to do it. Obviously, we would all like to live 100, be healthy, but God has His plans for those of us who believe in God. And anything can happen.
So succession becomes a point
Succession
to think about.
becomes very critical.
Yikes.
The other way you could think about it is perhaps acquire it in your individual name.
Okay.
But probably record a will where you say this property one has to go to A, B, C, or D. But things happen along the way. The property could end up being sold, so it's not necessarily utilized for the other person.
Okay.
Wills can also get challenged.
And contested, and they often do.
So unfortunately, then again, what happens is what it was initially acquired for doesn't get utilized for that.
Right.
Okay. And I guess the other question is, and I said I was holding it in trust for the kids until we're 25. And it's just that for me, I've got to figure out, do you have the financial muscle to be able to carry out what you need to? And I guess the another question is, so how long can it be held in trust? And I can stipulate that.
You can.
Yes, I can stipulate it. I can turn around and just say they don't get access to it until they're 30. I know, you're looking at me like, surely, 18. No, don't go to Vegas.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I don't think there's a necessarily a scientific right or wrong answer to that.
No.
Like you said, and sometimes it depends also on the upbringing of the children.
Yes.
There are some parents who are totally confident in giving their children the property when they're 18.
Yes, when they become legal.
I have a client whose son is my age and she's still not comfortable with putting the property in the son's name.
I was going to ask you that because we're doing a transaction now where we're buying land from a gentleman from the Maasai community. And this gentleman happens to be 55. And the title deed we're transacting on is held in trust for him by his 90-something-year-old mom.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which I found in fact, it was a point of concern for me that we might not be dealing with a legitimate property, because it didn't make sense that the 55-year-old
guy
needs someone
else to say.
Right.
Yeah.
So are there age limits to when someone
trust,
can hold?
Yes.
I don't think there's any limits, and it also depends on how you structure your trusts as well. And that's why I said it depends on how simple you want to make it. And your simpler would be your instance. I, Caroline, hold it on behalf of Kimeo until he turns 25.
Yes.
It could be as complicated to the sense where you have trustees appointed, where you've acquired the land, you develop the land, you require your trustees to continue managing the property, and all their function is to make sure that they derive income from it and pass it on to the children. So they're not even entitled to the property, and the idea and the intention is it's income for perpetuity.
Yes.
So that the income continues going on for their children or their children's children.
Right.
Yes.
So they don't sell the goose.
The goose that lays the golden egg.
Right.
Yes.
Or that, and you could even make it further complicated where the revenue from that asset, part of it goes on to build a kitty, which goes on to buy other assets or develop other assets, which go on to. So it really depends on, one, how much money you have, two, what your future plans are.
Right.
And whether, wealth generation across generations is also part of it.
Part of a goal, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Interesting.
Okay. Another
this
question.
Is good stuff.
Yeah.
Please feel free to bill everyone.
Yes, yeah.
After
this. Somebody, of course, says, how can one get more information on trust funds? As Solomon says, he will bill you. Find him. But okay, so for a person who's looking for trust, it's not a trust fund, trust 101.
So definitely, I agree with you. You need to consult a lawyer.
Consult a lawyer.
A licensed one, ideally.
Yes. So in fact, we as ALN...
Not your friend from Parklands.
Not, yes. Definitely not. Although they would be nice to kind of get your initial advice, but not necessarily implementation.
Right.
Good.
Because the other point is Parklands. Well, I'm a product
You're
of Parklands campus.
Yes.
So I'm not going to discredit it.
Right.
But yes, no, definitely, because the point is, if you ever want to sue someone for negligence, I don't think you're going to be able to sue a student for negligence.
Right.
Like, I've done that unit this semester.
Okay.
Come, I show you.
Yeah.
Yes, because we also talk like that as Kenyans.
Yeah.
You've done that
Have a
unit.
connect.
Have a connection.
Connection.
Come. Or my lecturer can show you. Yes.
So I think it's also important in terms of depending, like I said, there's various factors that you need to look at. Are you looking at wealth management, wealth creation, longevity of the trust relationship? Because sometimes we have clients who just don't want to own the property. They're happy for us to do it. And one of the vehicles we've created is a corporated trust, And a corporated trust is essentially what I've mentioned is, as opposed to an individual holding it and having issues, because one of the other issues we've also had is if you're an individual who's now holding the property in trust, you then have guys like KRA and NCC coming on you, but it's not yours. You're just simply holding it
For
from someone else.
Yeah.
But you end up taking the headache, and sometimes you're just purely doing it as a favor. Now, it really depends on how simple it is.
Right.
Like Caroline has no issue holding it for Kimeu because Kimeu is not holding any bank balance, not earning any revenue. You might have issues once he turns 18 and starts having a PIN and revenue and accounting for
and
that.
filing his nil returns.
And filing nil returns. But obviously, once you're starting to show that there's revenue coming from a certain thing going to someone, and you have to start accounting for it, it then probably makes sense for the more complicated stuff to be housed in an incorporated trust, which is something we have recently come up with as ANK. And that was part of the reasoning or the logic behind it.
Right.
And we look at what your intention is, what the tax implications are, because there's no point in buying an asset for an individual where by the time you transfer it to the individual,
It is wilted to...
it's wilted because simply the taxman ends up taking it.
Yes.
So an example is why a lot of people in the UK try and even avoid doing passing through will, because inheritance tax takes you about 30%.
Right.
While we don't have that in
Corporate
Kenya
tax,
yet,
Right.
by the time
You shouldn't have said that out
Nah,
loud.
because even I looked at the camera, I can feel Kerry sing.
Right.
you know, they're always looking for ways to generate revenue and look for things.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen in Kimeu's 4 turns 25,
Can you
21 years down the line.
Yeah.
Inheritance tax could come in, another tax, gift tax. We don't have a gift tax in Kenya yet,
Right.
but a gift tax could come in. So it's just something you've got to keep in mind and plan ahead.
Okay. Wow. All right. There's a lot to think about
There's
there.
a lot to think about there. The other thing that I can see came up a lot of times is how do you avoid family quarrels and you know, drama between family members in future?
Simpler answer is just don't have family. Or as my parents
I wasn't ready for that.
or as my parents tended to do is just have one child. So if it would be very easy for them to disinherit me.
Yes.
And there's no one for you to fight.
And no one for me to fight.
However,
you know, obviously everyone has different plans. So one of the easier things is to just tend to be open with the family and tell them what your plans are, what you're doing. Because sometimes what tends to happen, a lot of these squabbles tend to happen due to secrecy. One person's holding something, or you've got a property somewhere, a title somewhere in Gong or Kajiado where no one knows about it. Someone finds it and all of a sudden someone wants to hide.
Yeah, of course.
It's always nice to tend to be
open.
One of the easier ways is to tend to be open, saying, this is what I have. Unfortunately, this is a problem most of us men have. For lack of better words, you have a chips funga or a side dish.
Yes, and that one has also children.
And that one has children. And because those are secrets in itself, they know stuff that the main family doesn't know, and you tend to have various things. So unfortunately, we tend to create our own issues. And a lot of these squabbles and issues happen because
of
one family doesn't know the other family exists, and one family knows about property, the other family doesn't know
about,
and this is what tends to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
But you'll find there are, I wouldn't necessarily say having a smaller family means no issues, because you'll find larger families where, unfortunately for client confidentiality, I can't mention, but because they've come to us and they've come and told us we need to do A, B, C, D, E, and we've kind of guided them through the process. like up to the time of creating the trust to their death, like when they're buried or cremated, for instance.
Right.
Like the people who say that they want to be cremated, even though for the religious reasons they need to be buried. They want to be cremated the very next day simply because they don't want family disputes as to how it's supposed to be done.
Right.
Right?
So being open is very important. And I want to jump in here and state that, initially, when we talked about it, I wasn't like, do I not? And then I realized I've always said I'm not a single mother, I'm a single parent. I'm two in one. And just what he's talking about, openness, you continue to be a witness to this. And the fact that it is a known fact and documented on video that she held land in trust for her son and daughter. So it doesn't matter who shows up. Y'all are going to be there on Facebook going, wait, we know. Yes, and I love the fact that you say, make it open. I know that it is a change in mind, habit, tradition, but I think openness will save us a lot more drama in the future. Yeah.
So I think that definitely helps.
That helps. I mean, you asked the question and then I asked the lawyer, now, are you okay with the answer? Comment below. So this one you've intimated to, but I do want you to go over it again. What is the process once the children are of age to acquire the assets from the trust?
Good point. So in the simpler process, which I told you, individual or company owns it in trust for the individual. Once they attain the age of what the trust document provides, the property is simply transferred to the individual. Now, depending on how you've documented the process, there may be certain taxes you have to pay, stamp duty, capital gains tax, and God knows what, maybe whenever that happens. But typically, the tax laws provide that if it is moving from a trustee to beneficiary, they shouldn't be taxed.
Okay.
They shouldn't be. That's why it's very important as to how you document your documents. But typically, the simple answer is that's what should happen.
That's what should happen. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think by and large, and you said, yes, there is a complicated way, but there's a simple way.
Yeah.
Yes, which is also not a bad thing so long as you've got the documentation right.
Right.
And you're a documentation person. Is it because you hang out with this one?
Well, yes. Honestly, a lot of our due diligence and our DD is insane as Goshen acquisitions. A lot of that was informed when we were selling a piece of property, actually next to your Imbuko, to a dear friend of mine named Brian. I won't say his last name without his permission, but his lawyers were Anjarwalla Khanna. And the hoops they made us jump through in doing DD for Brian, I was like, whoa, I need those guys in my corner.
But remember, when I met you, you met my mother first.
Right.
And then I think one of the things I told you is, I have lawyers for my lawyers.
Yes.
Yes, I have lawyers for my lawyers.
Right.
Like, I don't know whether you read everything clearly, so I said, and that's how you met Carol Wayaki.
Yes.
Yes,
That's
I
how
got
met
lawyers
Carol.
for my lawyers. I want somebody else to look over your paperwork.
Yeah.
I'm a woman. I got plan A, B, C, D, and E. I got lawyers for my lawyers.
No, it's important, and yeah, I mean, the reputation speaks for itself, which is why I save them for the big transactions, because I know they'll have a lot of things covered, and that was my introduction to them. Their record keeping is nuts. In fact, I inherited one of the surveyors they use, who does a lot of our work now.
Okay.
I also am proud to say that I went to Alliance with one of the current managing partners. Shout out to Daniel Ngumi.
These people I went to Alliance are so tired.
What can I say?
I'm about to end this interview, but I want to still talk. And I think what we've been able to do here is not just answer the questions on trust, but once again, get people to understand the necessity of a lawyer. I think for me, it was always like female, single, so how do I make sure that this is okay? But it's what you said, the hoops. And I think I once told you, even when I can afford to buy something in cash, I'll still go through the system, because the sort of due diligence these people do,
It's
you
nuts.
can't do it. And
It's
then
nuts,
once
yeah.
the due diligence is done, I'm like, okay, I've got the cash here. Because,
Yeah,
and
peace
even
of
when I'm going
mind.
through a bank,
Yeah.
because I know the bank's due diligence is thorough, but because that item sits in their books until I pay it off.
Yeah.
But since their lawyers are doing all the crazy work,
Yeah.
I'm like, fine, let's do this.
Yes, well, there's lawyers and there's lawyers. You know,
yes.
it's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing.
Which is why we had to ask Anjarwalla Khanna to inform this conversation, because it's a critical issue,
Very.
one that ideally would survive your
life. Yes.
So you have to get things right from the very beginning.
That's the thing. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think you've heard me say this before, things don't go wrong, they start wrong.
Yeah.
Things don't go wrong, they start wrong.
They start wrong, yeah.
Yeah.
So get it right
Get it
from the
right
beginning,
first.
yeah.
So speak to Adnan. Is there anything else you want to add to this conversation that you have seen, that you understand, that we need to sleep on?
You know, if you ask Adnan that question, I can see the look on his face. He's
Yes,
like a
because
doctor.
immediately-
He's
yeah,
like,
yes,
he's
it's like- so
there's
he
a
starts-
million options.
Scalpel.
Right.
So I think you've both raised a very valid point and an important one, which is due diligence. And this is not a pitch to necessarily come to ANK.
Oh, pitch away.
Or
We can't afford you any other way.
but the point is always try and get legal advice, but get legal advice. Like you said, there's lawyers and there's lawyers. Try and speak to a lawyer who understands property and property law and property issues, because you will go out there to lawyers and they will tell you, "Funny search imetokea todie."
Yeah.
But I love one of the videos you have done where you go out to the public and you ask them what is an RIM.
Yes. And they're like, you're Sijui.
EOCG, right? And your common man out there won't know what an RIM is, and that's what your videos have shown, right?
Yeah.
And you know, we've shared the due diligence checklist with you on a property you're about to acquire, and you know, it looks like a prescription bill where we do it. And you know, it's a discussion I was having with him, is whether you're buying a property for 1 million shillings or 100 million shillings, the due diligence requirements is the same.
It's the same.
Yeah.
The work involved is the same in terms of due diligence. Now, what you want to spend to do it really depends on you. And there's some people will say, "Nanunua plot 100,000."
But
The bill is going to be X, and then they do
I know that
a
thing.
cost-benefit analysis, and you make it. You do what you have to do.
Yeah.
But there are certain properties that, you know, like Solomon's come to me. He's like, "Adnan, I don't care what the cost is, but I want you to do it." And he's actually doing the full menu of due diligence on it.
And I'm glad I did, because stuff came out that we had no clue about, that the seller conveniently avoided to tell us about. And actually right now the transaction is sort of in limbo, because questions were sent back to the advocate.
And there has been silence.
It's been 3 weeks
been
and
silence.
we're still waiting for answers. So, I mean, cheap can be expensive.
No,
So in that
cheap is expensive.
context, I mean, pick the right lawyers, pick the good ones. The good ones are generally known. I tell people all the time.
Yeah.
Don't get bogged down on an extra 50K, 100K here
Yeah.
and there. You're about to spend X amount of shillings.
Yes.
You want to have peace of mind in the end that everything is clean. No one's going to challenge your ownership after, especially if you're buying it for Kimeo.
Yes.
That's the point.
And you may not be here when he decides he wants it.
Yes.
You don't want to have him inherit issues because you cut corners.
Yeah.
There
know?
you go.
That's a whole point.
Don't make your children inherit a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's great that you're talking about the work that Adnan and the firm do, but I think it goes back to something that I tell a lot of people. And I know when I was speaking to the African women in Europe, I said, I trust Goshen, number one, because my mother said fine, because she met him before I did. And I wired money to him because she said fine, but also because he's very clear. Goshen doesn't sell land they don't own. Yeah, you own the land. You acquire it,
Yes.
and then you sell it to us. So there was a JD here, and there was a JBC, and there was
No, yeah, I mean, because it went through Adnan's team
Yes.
before we acquired it, and if there was issues that have been flagged, and then if something happens after we transfer it to you, you know who to hold accountable.
Exactly.
And that's
it
a
can't
whole
be the
point,
mother
yeah.
title was with I don't know who. No. Goshen sells land that Goshen owns. Let's talk about diaspora, just because
Sure.
in the 2 weekends that I have been involved with the African women in Europe, I told them, this idea of passing your money through relas, first and foremost, you really can't shoot your relatives. I mean, you'd like to, if they steal from
Yeah.
you, but you can't. And I'm like, go directly to Goshen, so that you've got one point of reference.
Yeah.
This is not 1985. You do a wire transfer from the US too, and you're dealing with the final. Because too often in diaspora, how can diaspora feel a lot more secure when because yes, you're sitting in the US, you're sitting in Germany, you're sitting in Holland, you're like, I want a piece of Nanyuki.
Yeah.
But every time I send 300,000 through my brother, when I come, there's nothing.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
We're actually going through that very situation where someone received our brochures, went to the website, there was banter back and forth.
Yes, and said, I'm
then
sending the money.
they went quiet.
Okay.
So we assumed, okay, they're not ready. As it turns out, they had actually sent money to their relatives to make payment, and it never got done. That was just like 3-4 months ago.
Yeah.
And now we find ourselves in a situation where it's like, well, no one paid, so the plot sold out, but I sent money. Like, well, we didn't receive
not
it.
to us.
Yeah, my sister was supposed to do this, that, and the other. It's a problem. 60% of our customers have had fraud-related situations around land transactions. So that's a great question for those in the diaspora.
So I think it's a tough one, because if you can't trust your relatives or your friends, then who do you trust?
You should not trust your relatives with your money.
Not with your money, but because obviously the best way is just personally fly down,
Of course,
come and check it, see it for
Which
yourself.
some have done.
Some do.
Some
yes.
do. Now, not many could, especially during the COVID time, although I
Yeah.
don't know how much investment was made through the diaspora during COVID time.
Best year of sales for us.
Wow, okay. Because I thought due to, the
Yeah,
entrenchments and whatnot,
we're
people
still
were
trying to
reluctant to
understand
move
what
that.
happened there. Yeah.
Oh, we were not doing anything else, so we had money.
We could save, yeah.
Yes.
We were saving.
So, and obviously during COVID time, a lot of countries were locked, so they couldn't fly down.
Yeah.
Now, you can say get your relatives to do it, but sometimes you could even be conned by developers. So, it's a really tough one.
Dicey.
The best and easiest is personally fly down and do it, because we've seen some memes or jokes out there where someone tells them that they've been collecting money to build a bungalow, and then they come down and then they see a mud hut
Yes.
seated on the property.
Yeah.
Your instance is where the client's been remitting money and the money's never come.
Yeah.
So obviously, as Caroline says, I think we've kind of moved to, we're no longer 1985, we're moving towards the digital age. Try and do a lot of due diligence. One of the things that we recommend is also engage a surveyor, right, as part of our due diligence. So, you can engage a lawyer, but, for me to travel down to Nanyuki, I'm probably going to charge Solomon like hour or 2 hours drive down, 2 hours drive back, just to. So sometimes it may even be as part of our due diligence. What we recommend is engage a surveyor to go and map out the property,
Yes.
check the locations, check whether there's any disputes.
Yeah.
One of the best examples for them is for them to actually go and do it as part of the physical site. Check. We also try and dig up the history of the property from the lands registry. Trace the history. Does this person who's so-called claiming to own the property, do they own the property? And a lot of people sometimes say they own the property, but when you ask them for the history of the property, they're not able to do it. Or sometimes even as you pull out documents or copies of the documents from the lands registry, you can't trace that history. Straight away, those start becoming red flags.
Yeah.
If you can't explain how it moved from A to D, and it all of a sudden moved from A to D without saying B and C.
Right.
You now need to start asking yourself, you can't produce copies of transfers, can't produce a stamp duty receipt of when you acquired it.
And there is a paper trail in land transactions.
A ton.
A ton of it.
Yeah. So would you say for those in the diaspora trying to buy for family, children, I know few who are buying for their parents even. The process of creating a trust for the sake of managing that property on behalf of someone is the same as for those who are here locally?
By and large would be the same.
Yeah.
But I guess it's slightly more complicated because they're outside the country. So something they have to keep in mind is, do they want to own the property and hold it in trust for whoever's here?
Yes.
Or do they want to choose someone here to hold it in trust because it may make sense to have someone locally available so that if the need ever arises, you have someone to pull the trigger.
Yeah, it makes sense. Except if I have trust issues because they've been kulaying my deposit money, then the incorporated trust is an option.
All the more reason to choose reliable parties. Like, for instance, we've got an incorporated trust and we hold a number of properties in trust.
Okay.
And ANK, for instance, is well established. We've been around for a long time. We've got a fixed office. That's the other thing that's important. Don't choose guys who
have a briefcase
and
meet at a coffee point.
Because always tracing these people later on is going to be a mission.
Right.
Again, cost element is there. Some people don't want to then incur that cost, but like Carol says, cheap is expensive.
Yeah.
So
do it right.
Do it right.
And how long has ANK been in existence?
History goes way back to 1960s. So we've been in place since 1960s when the late Saifuddin Anjarwalla started the firm way back in Mombasa,
right.
And then his two sons, Karim and Atik, took over and had the view and the vision and the mission to move to Nairobi and make things a lot bigger and better. They tried to merge or partner with a couple of other firms earlier on, and they were like, focus on litigation, and they were like, no, you need to look at the corporate side, and that's potentially where the growth is, and they were looked down upon. But 10 years down the line, the people who gave them that advice are now regretting that advice. But yeah.
Fantastic.
So you've been around for a while.
Been around.
Yeah, well, I happen to know that you guys started in Mombasa. At the time I met or interacted with your firm through Daniel Ngumi. I think you've been in existence for 50-something years, which says a lot, number one. So in terms of picking the right professionals to work with, they need to have some sort of establishment. And for those of you who are interested or curious, please go check out Anjarwalla Khanna's website, tons of information. Like I mentioned before, award-winning law firm. You will not regret it, I promise you. I have worked with them for years now. So get it done right, as Caroline said.
Yeah, things don't go wrong, they start wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not with them yet, but through Solomon, we all share the absolute expertise of Anjarwalla Khanna. Okay, I think we answered your questions. You've got any more? We can always rope him back. He might give us a fee note, but it is worth it. Thank you for watching. Oh, and by the way, own land in Kenya. You should.
Definitely.